Okay, so I think that that's enough of the custom curves over here. I want to dive into the other curves options that we have within here as well. So next to our custom curves, we have hue versus hue. So if we click on this, we are presented with a similar kind of graph, but it's different. Obviously, our line is straight across here. It no longer goes from bottom left to top right, but that's okay. And this is a very powerful tool, something that I use all the time to make very specific adjustments to certain hues within my image. So just like before, we have a histogram in the background, and this shows us a little bit of information about our image. So this histogram back here is basically just showing us what colors are we seeing most within our image. So we have a huge spike over here in this teal color over here. We got a little bit of this blue, and we got a tiny bit of this green, tiny bit of yellow. I don't even know where that yellow would be, but we can see that it's primarily this color over here. So if we wanted to make changes to just this color over here, you'd think that you would just create a dot on the line here, and then you can make a change. But you can see that we are changing the overall line. We're changing everything here, and that's not what we want to do. If we want to create a very specific adjustment to just this one color over here, then we're going to want to create those placeholders, right? So let's create a placeholder over here to the left. We'll create one to the right over here. Make sure that we're not moving that over. So now with both of those in place, I can create another point here in the middle and start playing around with only this specific hue. So I can bring it up to make it greener. We can see how it's affecting my image, and we can bring it down to make it more purpley. And this is the hue versus hue graph, and it's allowing us to change the hue of the hue that we've selected. So by moving the value up and down, we are changing the value of the hue, which basically allows us to change the actual hue itself. So by bringing it up, we're making it greener. By bringing it down, we're making it more purple, and then it goes into pink and then red. Up, we're going from green to yellow to like a reddish. So this is a very powerful tool to use. Let's open up our clips and actually just select a different clip to play around with, because this clip over here it really only has like one range of colors. Let's find something else. So this longboard clip over here, let's fit this. Actually, let's zoom in so we can just focus on the wheels here. So let's look at our hue versus hue graph here, and let's see what's going on. As we can see, we have a lot of reds. We got a bunch of orange and yellow colors. No green. We got no like teal, but then we got some blue, and that's probably what it's seeing in the shadows here. It's picking up those darker blue hues from the shadows. So we can see we have a big spike of those blues here. And then we also got a bit of reds too, which I'm assuming it's probably picking up from somewhere in the wheels. Now, if I want to make a change to just the wheels over here, what can I do? Well, I can create those 3 points that I made on the last clip, but what I can also do is use the eyedropper as well. So if I go into my preview, we can see that I have this eyedropper. Now, quick note, if you're not seeing this eyedropper, make sure to go down to the bottom left over here. It might be set on off, so your cursor will just be a cursor. So just make sure that you have this on and you have qualifier selected, and that way you can use this little eyedropper tool or the qualifier to select what color range you're trying to change. So let's select this orange here, and we can see that we have 3 dots created on our graph here. And the middle point will automatically be selected because that's the one that we want to be changing. The points around it are the placeholders, right? So that we're not affecting everything else. So you want to think of this as like one continuous line. So this point here is really like over here. It just repeats over here to the right. So with this color selected, let's bring it up. Let's bring it down. And we can see what kind of changes we're making to our image here. Now, okay, let's say we want to make these wheels a bit more purple. Cool. But we're not really selecting all of that orange color. It looks like we're missing out on a bunch of it. And that is probably because we want to select this range over here as well. So what we can do is add another point here, and let's play around with this one here. And now we are covering a broader spectrum of that red orangey color, and we are affecting more of the image. So before this point, we were looking like that. So it was a lot more precise. And by adding another point over here, we can actually add a point here and just delete this point here so that the placeholder is a little bit further away. And this point is now affecting a broader spectrum of color. We can even move this over to the right to broaden that even more. We can move this over to the left. Now that point is affecting more of a range of that orangey color. And I'm just gonna click this reset button up here in the top right to reset. One thing to note is we have some presets down here available to us. So let's say we wanted to select reds, we can just click on that and it's going to automatically create this point over here that will allow us to change all the red values in our image. Same thing goes for all these other colors next to it as well right here. And this button in the bottom left over here allows us to create editable splines. So if we click on this with a point selected, it gives us these little handles over here that we can use to kind of make that transition from one point to another a bit smoother. And this is something that we can actually access back in our custom curves as well. If we go back to custom curves, I'm just going to reset this. And we go here, top right corner, we click the three dots, we can select editable splines. And once we select any of our points, we have this handle over here. And this handle is very useful because it changes the way that we are actually transitioning from one point to another. It can make it smoother. And it does actually change the way, if we compare using the editable splines versus just using points, we can see that it actually does change the way that the curve flows here. So that's something to consider. A lot of professionals say that it makes the roll off a lot smoother between your highlights and shadows. And basically what that means is it's just like that contrast transition from, you know, your midtones to your shadows, your midtones to your highlights. It can make it a lot smoother by using editable splines versus going the route of just creating points and not using editable splines. So I'm going to reset that. And really that's like a personal preference thing. Play around with editable splines, you know, compare the two. In my opinion, like I do think it's a bit subjective. Figure out what works for you and stick with that. But recently I have been finding myself using editable splines. I do enjoy playing with these handles over here in order to create my S-curves. But really at the end of the day, you can do whatever works for you. Now, next to hue versus hue, we have hue versus saturation. So same kind of thing, except now we're changing the saturation of each hue. So we can go up to our image, we can use our qualifier to select what range we want to work with. So we've selected this orange range. And now if we bring this up, we are changing the saturation. So we are now making those oranges way more saturated. We bring this down, we are desaturating them. And obviously we have that very specific range. We can broaden the range over here by moving this point over here to the left, this point over here to the right. And now we have a broader range. Now we're going to be affecting more of the overall wheels. And we are able to change the saturation of just the wheels, just like that. Really cool tool, something I use all the time in combination with hue versus hue and all these other ones. So that's awesome. Next, we have hue versus luminance. So in here, we are able to change the luminance or brightness of each hue. So again, let's select our orange color here. But instead of clicking the wheels, because it's too specific by doing that, we can just press this red value here. And let's start playing with the luminance here. So now we just have the wheels selected. We're making them a lot brighter. We're increasing that luminance. And we're decreasing that luminance value by bringing it down. I'm going to reset. Next, we have luminance versus saturation. So now in here, we can change how saturated each range of luminance is within our image. So we can choose how saturated do we want the shadows to be? How saturated do we want the midtones to be? How saturated do we want the bright parts of our image to be? So let me just head up here and use the qualifier to select what area I want to change the saturation of. What luminance of my image do I want to start manipulating the saturation of? So let's play around with the darker parts of our image. So I'm just going to click in here and we can see that we are given a point here. Now let's play around with this and see what's happening to our image. So we can see if I bring this all the way up, we are making those shadows way more blue. That looks pretty blue, way too blue for me. If we bring this down, we can see that we are desaturating just that range of luminance within our image. So the darker parts over here. Now this is pretty tight over here. Let's delete these points around it. Let's extend it over here so we are affecting more of the shadows, more of the darker parts of our image. And now let's move this point up and down. We can see that we're affecting a wider spectrum of the shadows within our image here, which is pretty awesome. This is a pretty cool tool. And when you're working with footage that has a lot more information in it, you can make very specific adjustments and make drastic changes to the look of your image by doing things like this. These different graphs allow us to make very specific changes to very specific parts of our image, which is really cool. And in combination with the qualifier, we could do some pretty crazy things with these. Now, next to luminance versus saturation, we have saturation versus saturation, and then we have saturation versus luminance, which all do similar types of things. They allow us to select very specific parts of our image, whether that's saturation or luminance, and just manipulate those aspects of our image. So all of these are very powerful tools, and I definitely recommend that you go in, play around with each one of these individually and experiment. Get experimental, drop in some footage, use some of the footage provided to you from this course, and play around with it. Get a better understanding of how these tools work so that you have a deeper understanding of the power of these tools and what you can do to your images. Once you understand how you can use all of these, the possibilities are endless. You can do some very cool stylistic stuff with all of these features, and you'll see how I use these later on within this module. Now, just like our scopes over here, we have this button here that allows us to pop this out. So if we're using multiple displays, we could take this over, drag it over to a different display, and then always have this available to us. And it also just frees up this area so that we can look at other things. So in this case, we're seeing the qualifier. So right now I have the curves on my other monitor over here. So I'm seeing my curves, my log wheels, and my qualifier all at once, which is pretty cool. And if you ever want to bring this back into its place, just hit that X and it will pop back into its spot over here. So that is the overall look into our scopes over here. Super powerful feature. Like I said before, get into DaVinci, play around with these yourselves, experiment, get a first-hand understanding on how to use these tools by experimenting. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you learned something new, and I'll catch you in the next one.